What's up guys, the Strong Boys 19 here. This is another episode for Classic Albums Revisited, where it's a segment that I review one of my favorite albums of all time, and I'm going to be reviewing this album that recently celebrated its 50th anniversary almost a few months ago, and of course I'm going to be talking about Neil Young's After the Gold Rush. After the Gold Rush is Neil Young's third studio album. It was released on the 19th of September of 1970. This was released through the Reprise Records label, owned by Frank Sinatra. This is the follow-up to the 1969 album, Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere, which was the first time Neil Young released with the backing band of his called Crazy Horse, previously known as the Rockets. But unlike Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere, this album is consistent in a different sound into genres on folk rock and country rock. Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere also marks the first experience of Crazy Horse involving Danny Whitten, who worked with Neil on some of the tracks on this album. Around this time, Young had been with a trio called Crosby, Stills and Nash and released their first album together as a quartet named Deja Vu, released March 11th the same year. The album released two singles, Only Love Can Break Your Heart on October 19th and the Japan-only release single of When You Dance I Can Really Love, March 1971. Some songs to the album, Only Love Can Break Your Heart, was lyrically based around the breakup between Graham Nash and Joni Mitchell. Southern Man, a protest song, one of the darker tracks, lyrically describes the racism towards the black people in the American South. Don't Let It Bring You Down was one of the first tracks Neil Young wrote in a drop C tuning, although tuned a whole step down. The album has been released to mixed reviews upon release, some critics calling it a disappointment as a follow-up to Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere. However, years later, over time it has been regarded as a classic and in Young's recording career. After the Gold Rush was the record where I was completely introduced into Neil's discography, and this album has always been one of my top highest favorite albums of all time because it really gave me a lot of the hope and the experience at the same time to discover an artist that is so versatile in the form of the originality and to make different records in separate styles, especially like with others like Bob Dylan, for example. And Neil Young showcased an intro to me at the same time to go into a different form of aspect of learning things, why musicians like him became such a prolific artist. After the Gold Rush brings so many memories for me, as that when I had first listened to the album, I was so hooked about this record and the tone to the album. Besides that, it's different to Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere, is to me a brilliant separate form of an identity. And I think that's one of the things that I love about the album. After the Gold Rush's experience for me is that it has its own delivery, its own emotion, and also its own path. And not only that, it features less of the very raw, dirgy, rocky kind of sounds on some tracks on the previous album, like on Cinnamon Girl to Down by the River, Cowgirl in the Sand, etc. There is some beauty of these tracks on that album, in the softness, on the acoustic, rocking vibes as well. But with After the Gold Rush, this record is another big form of an expression, and this is really one of those packages of music that became like an important part for me to really acknowledge the fact that an album could really still stand out by itself. The title of the album was taken after being inspired by the screenplay by Dean Stockwell Herb Brennan, and he was making the film of the same name, and Young had read the screenplay and asked him if he wanted to produce the material for it, but then problems went around the making of it and the script had been lost, and there were some tracks that would have been included on this untitled, unfinished now movie. I absolutely find that After the Gold Rush's experience was very comforting to me. It's so warm and a very nice continuation for Neil to go into a phase of becoming a big workaholic. And it's like that at the same time he is becoming more and more mature into a phase of writing music in different ways, from something poetic to something personal, and that's another one of the highlights I loved about the album. The opening song, Tell Me Why, is a beautiful opening starter to the album, and I think that this one just sets the tone on what's going to be setting into for the rest of the record. I love how Neil strums the rhythm on the acoustic guitar, and hearing the other multi-tracked lead guitars in the background while the song is playing. I love the vocal harmonies on the chorus. I think this is one of those standout big classic songs, as much of a great opener like Cinnamon Girl to others like Out on the Weekend from Harvest, etc. The title track, After the Gold Rush, is always, no word of a lie, one of the all-time big greatest classics in his repertoire. Besides that, there was no word of an actual meaning behind the lyrics to this song. Even Neil doesn't know. Instrumentation was sublime, and the touching notes on the chords on the piano were perfectly soft and placed together. And you can't go really wrong with this masterpiece of a song, and it can for some people be at a bit of an emotional side, and there is a lot of that beauty in this song alone. Only Love Can Break Your Heart. This track, out of all of the repertoire that I had listened to from Neil, this is my favourite Neil Young song of all time. I remember the first time I had heard this song, I have loved it. The simplicity on the chord playings to the 3/4 time signature on the drums, and when the chorus came on, I was really smiling because of how gorgeous it sounded, onto the rich tone of the voice, and the harmonies were a perfect blend into this style. I have absolutely adored this song right from the start to the finish. This was one of the songs that made me become a big fan of him over time. Southern Man, the aggressive, most angriest song of the album. It's very dark, and it's so intensifying in its sound, and the very sensitive messages had to be alerted to the listener. The vocals on the song have been wailing, and also making it even more of an uncomfortable dirge with these very loose lead guitar works. Yes, they can be sounding sloppy and not as well of a big form of an inventive solo, but I guess that's a part of its charm, because it's so ragged and just a very uncompromising form of an emotional kind of outcry. Southern Man is one of his best in the aggressive side of protest songs, especially like on others from Rocking in the Free World and Crime in the City. Then we go to two tracks. The intermission song of the album, Till the Morning Comes. Just something very joyous and an upbeat type of sound, just more than a minute long, from the jangling guitar playing and the poppy piano sound, again onto the sound of the trumpet and the vocal harmonies. It's a really, really nice, comforting piece to conclude the first half of the album after the intensity and the moody sound of the last track previously. The second half of the album does deliver, in my opinion, again one of Neil's underrated gems. The cover of Oh Lonesome Me, originally a 1950s country song by Don Gibson, which I have actually not heard the original yet. This cover is one of my all-time favourites from him, and yet alone he would be making many new covers over time in his career, but I think that this one is one of his very best. It's a very slow, lonely feel to it, and again, I love the vocal harmonies and the bridge, hearing Young and Witten together. I also really like the very brief, distorted chord sound while the softness of the country-tinged acoustic sound was playing later on in the song's structure. I love the sweet sound of the harmonica as well, and I think this is just a brilliant addition into the overall worth and the theme and the sound of this album. Don't Let It Bring You Down. This is another song which Neil provides the listener a darker mood or feel, and this is like a painting of its imagery, that the colours just run down through the paper, and it's quite an atmospheric song, and I like lonely again, and very expression driven the sound was, and also with the lovely down-tuned acoustic guitar sound that blends in very comfortably into this track. Birds, I personally think this is one of the most underrated Neil Young songs ever. It's like After the Gold Rush, but in a gentle way, and it's pretty emotional from the moment you hear it, especially with the wonderful harmonies that soar full of bliss on the chorus. I feel that a track like this definitely deserves much more of the attention that it truly needs, and it's one of my other favourite songs on this album and of Young's career of all time. When You Dance I Can Really Love. This is another number with like a desperate sound of performance onto the vocal department, and musically this is like Cinnamon Girl in a way, but again it's something that is full of an innocence, form of expression. It's pretty catchy as well, especially onto the opening riffs to the chorus, while the drums power through very gently, but with the harmonies all the way through the song is excellent. I Believe in You is one song with a relationship, difficult breakup kind of feel, something different to the feeling of Only Love Can Break Your Heart, but this one does contain another set of the emotion sound, especially with how Young sounded on this song. Pretty underrated, that not many people would talk about personally, like on the other big favourites on the album. But I Believe in You is a song with a delivery that continues its steady countrified pace, and I really enjoy this one, that personally connects with me as much of the enjoyability that I have loved with the rest of the material on this album. Cripple Creek Ferry. This is the number, like Till the Morning Comes, that is more than a minute long, that this time concludes the album. This is the number, like After the Gold Rush, that would have been included for the screenplay of After the Gold Rush. And this one is joyous as well, but uplifting. I really like the positive vibe onto the song, the brief set of the vocals. To me, this is a number where it concludes the album perfectly. It doesn't have to be so dramatic. Cripple Creek Ferry is very nice to finish off the album in its own steady and like a cozy feeling to me. I know that's pretty strange for me to say that in that type of context, but personally that's how I would feel when I listen to this track. Cripple Creek Ferry fits in to finish the album so smoothly. After the Gold Rush is a record I could go on about because it still resonates with me. It has a big connection that I have loved from the moment I put it on, and this has always been my favourite in his discography, as well as some of the other ones, like on Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere to records of Tonight's the Night, Freedom, Comes a Time, Ragged Glory, etc. But this was the one that I have always got the most memories of, and I would recommend this album, including his follow-up album Harvest, to get into if you want to be interested into his sound. That's all I would like to say about After the Gold Rush by Neil Young, and let me know what you think of this album in the comments below. And I am also going to be reviewing Ragged Glory because that album celebrated not too long ago its overall 30th anniversary, and I'll keep an eye out for that. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll keep you guys posted for more videos in the near future.